Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 12th of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that many different ways. The web is an easy way to do that, weather.gov/Alaska. You can always listen to the Marine VHF broadcast or your NOAA weather radio. Give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. You'll get your daily afternoon map briefing from the National Weather Service in Anchorage on YouTube, and you can simply find that by looking for AKwx in the search bar. Or, after this broadcast, a little bit later in the evening, you can watch the complete Alaska Weather Show from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org. Simply on the right side of the screen, you'll find the YouTube broadcast, the most recent one that's been published, or go to that search bar again and type in AKwx TV. It works very well on your cell phone, too. Here's a look at the satellite picture out west. You can see there's a lot of moisture in the form of clouds spiraling around. Some of these a little bit more visible than others, remnants from tropical disruptions that are moving across the central and western Pacific and then spiraling back toward the north. We can see several different waves here, but a lot of what we're seeing across the Bering is just that marine stratus and fog. It's been prevalent thanks to high pressure squashing it and holding things pretty much in place for the last several weeks. We are getting a taste, though, of things that appear to be fallish and wintry coming up out of the Chukchi Sea and moving toward the north and west. Most of these disturbances haven't been terribly strong yet, and many more of them lined up over the next several days are not very strong either. And as they approach, they're kind of falling apart, losing their big punch of much cooler weather that's behind them. But it's a sign that maybe we're doing a little bit of window washing or probably sweeping the floors of the Arctic and getting the shop ready to open for business as we head toward the latter portions of August and into early September. So not a whole lot going on just yet, but we're watching more of those disturbances sweeping in from northwest to south and east. Let's take a look back toward Alaska, and here's the visible satellite picture, and we're getting to that point in the year where we're not able to show a whole day's worth of loops anymore because of the way the sun angle is. But boy, when we have the visible satellite picture, it sure is nice. You can see all the clouds over southeastern Alaska, and all of those clouds over places like Juneau and Sitka and Annette today just dropped a boatload of rain, another inch or so in just about all of those places. In the meantime, temperatures rebounded back into the upper 50s and lower 60s for many parts of southeast after some of that drier air swept in. And you can see there's plenty of it across the Gulf of Alaska by the end of the day. And as that low pressure moved eastward, guess what happened across south central? Air was moving in from north to south, and that southerly flow of air continued to bring in very dry weather from the interior and from the areas just on the inland all the way across Anchorage and Wasilla and Palmer and Kenai and Seward. What a beautiful day there with temperatures easily in the upper 60s and lower 70s. In some cases, they're just a gorgeous day in south central. Back to the interior on the other side of the hills, well, you got a little bit more cloud cover, and a lot of that trapped moisture there did drop a little bit of precipitation, but really not all that much. Temperatures were fairly mild for most, and you can see we have more of a westerly flow rather than a driving northerly flow that would bring in that much cooler weather. High pressure seen here across the west coast and just east of St. Paul and south and west of Nunivak Island, spiraling in that low stratus there and also feeding in some warmer and wetter air into places like Adak and Shemya, though temperatures weren't horribly torrid at all. In fact, they're fairly cool. So here's a look at the surface map. You can see high pressure sitting across the Copper River Basin at 1,016 millibars. There's fairly stable here, and again pushing air out to sea and then feeding back into the vacuum that is low pressure across southeast. Ahead of this is where the wet and disturbed air was that yielded a bunch of rain. Behind it, dry and much warmer weather coming off of the continent. High pressure sitting across the west coast, 1,021 millibars. Here's one of those active areas of weather trying to move off of eastern Asia and the Chukchi Sea, and slightly warmer air that's working northward and encouraging a southeasterly flow to move along the Beaufort seacoast. And because of that, ice was getting a little bit closer to places like Point Barrow and areas along the Beaufort Seacoast earlier today. That's going to change, though, because of this disturbance sweeping across the north. As it does so, the winds will come in a little bit more from the west and then eventually back towards southwest, feeding back into low pressure as it moves a little bit further northward in the coming days. So watch for that ice to shift in a little bit closer and then move back out away. In the interior, we're still watching for areas of smoke across the middle Yukon and Tanana valleys there. Low pressure just offshore of the Prince William Sound region, still drawing in some drier air across south central and the Kenai Peninsula. Looks like a beautiful night. For southeast, a couple areas of spotty wet weather. Most of that probably would be south tonight. Out across the west in the Yukon Delta, 1,023 millibar high pressure system, allowing just a few showers to form where the wind is hitting the slopes of the terrain just right. Places like St. Lawrence Island and Nunivak Island, and also some wetter weather coming into the central and eastern chain. As we get into Thursday, watch for some showers to pop up across the Brooks Range, the middle and upper Yukon Valley, and don't be shocked to see showers or maybe even a thunderstorm develop around Sparivon in areas west of the southernmost Alaska Range, probably closer to the interior around Lake Iliamna, maybe not as far south as places like King Salmon. So this will be a little bit confined to areas a little bit closer to the interior of southwest, but not so much along the coast. High pressure sitting across the Yukon Delta nudges northward just a little bit, so 1,022 millibars there sneaking into Norton Sound and trying to get a hold of the weather around Nome. As you look further north, though, that means more of a south and westerly flow moving back into the Chukchi Seacoast, feeding into low pressure, heading toward Point Barrow at 1,006 millibars. Low pressure across the central chain, drawing in more of a stronger southwesterly flow, so the winds are going to be changing in the Aleutians in the coming days. Southeast may see some showers and light rain across some of the higher terrain. Coastal areas look dry, and it looks like another gorgeous day around Prince William Sound and south central Alaska for tomorrow. For Friday, high pressure sitting right on top of Shishmaref at 1,018 millibars. And again, that's feeding in more of a south and west gentle flow across the Chukchi Seacoast and helping to push that ice a little bit further away from the coast as we go toward the weekend. Low pressure across the Bering Sea has grabbed a little bit more of that warmer and wetter air and moving it across the southwestern coast into Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern chain. That could bring a better chance for some light rainfall there. And for southeast, you might get a taste of some drier weather heading into Friday and the weekend there as high pressure starting to take charge of the Gulf of Alaska at 1,025 millibars. Here's a look at temperatures today, and following any rainfall, we saw a decent day across some parts of southern southeast. Sitka was 59, Juneau in the mid-50s today, and places like Cake made it up to 68 degrees, 50s and 60s for many around the Dixon entrance down toward Ketchikan and Annette. Prince William Sound made it into the mid to upper 60s today. Cordova was 68, 73 around Seward again with a little bit of a northerly breeze, 65 for Kenai, 67 in Anchorage, 63 around Talkeetna, and 62 in Glen Ellen and Gulkana. Mid-50s though, thanks to clouds and cooler weather around Fairbanks, with Eagle reporting 58, 56 in Northway. Fort Yukon was 55, many along Anaktuvuk Pass, Arctic Village, all the way down toward Ambler and Bettles, all in the 50s today, though Anaktuvuk Pass started in the 20s earlier this morning. 40s and 50s for the Arctic coast. It looks like Atkasuk made it to 56, while Barrow was only 43, 58 around Wainwright, with temperatures along the Kotzebue Sound region in the 40s and 50s. A little bit further into the interior, we saw some places jump into the lower 60s. 51 around Nome. Unalakleet was 48 with Sparivon at 52. Grayling at 52. Lake Iliamna was 53 degrees, and Bethel also reporting lower 50s this afternoon. Pribilov's in the lower 50s with 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sand Point was mild at 63, about the same as Chignik, a little bit warmer in Kodiak this afternoon, and lower to mid 50s for many in the central and western chain. Now, overnight low temperatures are starting to cool down. We're getting a taste of that here in Anchorage, and many out in the interior are starting to see those effects as well, especially across the Alcan border where readings are dropping into the 30s. 48 for Fort Yukon, 38 in Barrow tonight. Nome looking at 45, upper 40s to low 50s for the Bristol Bay region and the Alaska Peninsula. Dutch Harbor and Alaska closer to 50, even cooler than that in the Pribilofs. Prince William Sound in the 30s and 40s, with many in southeast looking at temps in the lower 50s overnight, with highs tomorrow back in the lower 60s, including the capital city. High temps tomorrow in the Cook Inlet region back in the upper 60s to even low 70s if you head up the Susitna Valley. Mid 60s around the middle Tanana Valley, including Fairbanks at 64 with 59 in Fort Yukon. Closer to 50 around Barrow. Coastal areas could be just a hair cooler than that, but it is going to be a fairly mild day with those south and westerly winds returning. Lower 50s around Kotzebue Sound. Norton Sound temperatures, including Nome, back in the 50s. Southwestern coast temps in the lower to mid-50s, with Dillingham and King Salmon back in the lower to mid-60s. Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, just shy of 60 degrees tomorrow, and most of the central and western chain will stay in the lower 50s. On to flying weather now. Expect IFR conditions for most of the Arctic coast, as well as the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, the west coast from the western tip of the Seward Peninsula down toward Cape Newenham, including Nunivak Island and St. Lawrence Island, the central and western chain, and the Pacific coast of the eastern chain. Most other areas along the coastal regions will be MVFR, with the exception of the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, and eastward toward the Cross Sound and the northern entrances there. Watch for some patchy IFR across the higher terrain and southeast. Your pass conditions shape up like this, though. We'll probably see some improvement in Anaktuvuk Pass as the day goes on, heading for MVFR after an IFR start for there and for Adigan Pass during the daytime. Do expect some improvement in both areas. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see VFR conditions develop by the afternoon. Now on the western side, watch for some convection as you're flying through. Rainy Pass, we expect to see MVFR through most of the day. Windy Pass looks to be marginal again for your Thursday. Isabel Pass, marginal conditions through most of the day. Mentasta Pass should be visual through most of your Thursday, and it looks like pretty good sailing through Tanita Pass with visual expected there. Portage Pass, VFR is expected all day long, and Chilkoot and White Pass, we expect to see improvement after an MVFR start for your Thursday if you're flying in that direction. Now freezing levels show signs of that cold air dropping southward. You can see even cooler weather located up here across the eastern parts of Asia and Siberia. But most other parts of Alaska are still very warm. Freezing levels from 8 to 10,000 feet over the Gulf, also across the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. And levels up across the Chukchi Seacoast also as high as 8,000 feet, a little bit cooler the further east you go out toward Kaktovik, and the interior running between 6,000 and 8,000 feet in most areas. So no major issues really for any big surge of cool weather coming our way. Icing potential then is really focused on those levels that are pretty high up there, 10 to 12,000 feet for most areas. Now there might be a few spots across the northwest coast. They're a little bit lower than that in the morning, but by and large, light to isolated, moderate at worst, and most of those threats again are pretty high altitude stuff. Jet stream potential shows low pressure out across the west, and most of these speeds aren't really anything to write home about just yet. Levels are around 90 to 100 knots or so, and you can see another area of low pressure across the central and eastern Gulf heading for the Pacific Northwest, and relatively light winds here at 70 knots or lower surrounding any other waves working in or out of Alaska, including the one that we see working across the Chukchi Seacoast that is slowly dropping south, also kind of connected by the wave that we see out across the western Bering Sea. In the meantime, we're experiencing ridging. That means a slowing of the winds and a southwesterly flow developing on the western side of that. Wind speeds from 5 to 15 knots or so coming into the western Gulf. Low pressure working into British Columbia, dragging in north and westerly flow at 9,000 feet through southeastern Alaska. The strongest winds we have are coming ashore across the Chukchi Seacoast, just north of the Bering Strait, running in around 20 to 30 knots or so. Again, that's from the south and west, and that's what's going to be guiding the weather below that and changing the way the ice is moving there out across the Beaufort Seacoast. At 3,000 feet, you can already see a little bit more clearly defined ridge of high pressure. That's that upward bump in that air pattern here from southwest across the western coast from 20 to 30 knots, and then really slowing down in the interior, about 5 to 10 knots or so through the Yukon Valley, a little bit faster over the Brooks Range and the Arctic coast, and then slowing down again as it moves from northwest to south and east, 5 to 15 knots there. We do have a weak disturbance just north of Adak and Atka. The wind speeds are a little bit faster on the south and western side, running around 35 knots or so. That's also helping to stir up the marine winds. You'll see that a little bit later in the show. So as far as turbulence goes, there are really no major issues, probably running into some bumps there from Barrow south and west through Wainwright, Point Hope, Point Lay. On the northern side of the Seward Peninsula and south side of Kotzebue Sound, below 5,000 feet, probably running into a few bumps there as some of those disturbances pass through and the winds start to pick up a little bit more from the south and west. Across the central and eastern Aleutians, below 5,000 feet, almost all the way east toward Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, not quite as far east as Akutan, it looks like. You'll probably start to run into a little bit of faster winds, maybe some gap wind issues there, and probably some bumps as we go through the day. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll have a little bit more information on the sea ice edge, of course, and a look at your marine weather here and a recap of the next few days in just a few minutes. Stay with us. Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is our good friend Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. He is here and has been here many times to talk to us about weather satellites and how those can help Alaskans understand our weather, how we can do better detection, keep more people safe from things even like volcanic ash. But today, Eric, you're going to talk to us a little bit more about weather satellites and how that can keep Alaskans safe and protect our property from wildfire, right?
That's right, Dave. Today's topic is where there's smoke, there's fire. And thanks for having us back again to Alaska
Anytime.
Weather. Well, weather satellites have a lot of different instruments on them. It turns out that the electromagnetic spectrum has a lot going on in it, and only one part of that is visible light, what we see.
Right.
Weather satellites, of course, report that. Today's topic is wildfires.
Okay.
There are some people who say that in Alaska in the summertime you don't have severe weather. These people are usually from Oklahoma or somewhere, and F5 tornadoes tend not to occur in Alaska.
Right.
People have also said what we do have in the summer. What is Alaska's severe summer weather can be hydrology,
right,
flash flood and erosion in the mountains and things like that, and fires, wildfires.
Absolutely.
Those were here in 2004, certainly remember that. We've got an example here from 2014. Now it was a quiet season overall, but in May, down on the Kenai Peninsula, we had a wildfire on the Funny River, and this is a satellite image from a polar orbiter that went right over Alaska, and we can see the plume of smoke coming out of that fire on the Kenai, curling down. It's caught in the wind.
Right.
It goes down toward Kodiak Island, curves around. You can see it circulating around a low pressure system that's in the Gulf of Alaska.
It was a beautiful picture.
Oh my gosh.
Except there was a fire.
There's a fire there. The nice thing is with this satellite image, you can tell where the fire origin is, where the smoke is coming from. And it's a color image. We're looking at the wavelength spectrum of about 0.4 to 0.7 micrometers or microns. That's what the human eye would see. If you were riding on the satellite and looked down, you could see this kind of an image.
Right.
So that's pretty nice. But it turns out there's more to the electromagnetic spectrum than just visible light.
Okay.
You've heard of infrared, ultraviolet, that kind of thing. If we move into longer wavelengths, let's go to one specifically, 3.7 micron.
Okay, 3.7.
Why worry about that one?
Okay.
Well, we've got an example here. 3.7, it turns out, happens to be very sensitive to a certain temperature range, temperatures where fires burn.
Okay.
And so we've got an example zoomed in a little more from that same Funny River fire down on the Kenai Peninsula, and we can see that you get up into a few hundred degrees Fahrenheit, and that's where the colors are. We can see there on the Funny River fire to the west and to the east, almost a horseshoe shape there, is not only we're seeing where the fire is in a general sense, but specifically where it's the active fire
That is where
front.
it's burning right now.
And it's
Amazing.
3.7 microns is the important temperature there.
Okay.
That's right.
So this is really important to firefighters on the ground, people that are making plans and directing the firefighters on where they need to go and cut the trenches and keep people safe.
You know it. If you want to fight that fire, you got to know where it is.
Okay.
You got to know the leading edge. We've also got a movie loop, nothing quite like animating it in time.
Yeah.
You can see the fire spreading out over time with a succession of film or a succession of images. Now this is one channel, 3.7 micron. You know, we looked at that color smoke image before.
Right.
And that's actually a red, a green, and a blue. That's how you get color imagery. What if you took 3 different wavelengths in the infrared? You went from like 2.2 micron, 1.5 micron, up to 3.7. You mix them together, you get this other kind of color image, which is even a better way to sharply bring out the details of where that leading edge of the fire is.
Okay.
You'll note, though, in the infrared, guess what? We don't see the smoke. That's too bad. And on these movie loops, you can see the clouds go by. These channels can't see through clouds. The lesson is there's no one perfect solution. You got to have the visible, you got to have some of that infrared single 3.7 channel, some of the infrared mixing to help get a different perspective. Another one, we've talked before about a fun channel called the day-night band.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, and in Alaska in the winter, it's great. We've got all this darkness. The day-night band is so sensitive to seeing light. You can see features that otherwise aren't available. Now in Alaska, when you have a forest fire, it tends to be light out all the time. It's our summer. But we can go down south to the Rim Fire in California in 2013. Now, okay, it was in California, not Alaska, but Alaskan crews went down to fight that fire, so we can talk about it here on Alaska Weather. Here we have a 3.7 micron channel shot of the rim fire, again kind of a horseshoe shape showing that active fire front down there, and then we'll look again to the day-night band the visible light, and then you can see how the fire is all bright. You can see the active fire front and actually the city lights over there too. Turns out that the cities, while they're active in a social sense, are not really hot in a fire sense. So they don't show up in the 3.7 micron. They're not hot like a fire is, but the fire in the cities look the same from a visible light perspective. And a fun thing here too is that we can see the smoke plume going north from the rimfire on the day-night band. So if we were ever to have, like in 2004 in Alaska, you get dark at night, we still had an active fire season that year.
Right.
That was, you know, that really bad year. The day-night band didn't exist then, but if we had fires now in August, we could use it then. The lesson here is weather satellites, they offer many different wavelengths of light. Some are used for different purposes, and some of these we just looked at tonight are especially helpful here in Alaska to find and to track the behavior of these wildfires so the crews can go out there and do their jobs.
Sure, sure. So a satellite toolbox for the firefighting crews and the fire weather forecasters, and it just underlines how important satellites are, especially for Alaska and our mission for the National Weather Service to protect life and property, and also to enhance the national economy. So wonderful stuff there, Eric. And people can look at pictures like this anytime by going to gina.alaska.edu. You'll find images there all around Alaska at various times of the year, and not just about fire weather, but volcanic ash and smoke and anything else you want to check out. They're always beautiful pictures and always interesting to look at no matter what time of the day. Thanks again for joining us, Eric. We appreciate it and welcome you back anytime. For this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. See you next time. Let's take a look at sea surface temperatures now. This is an actual temperature that we've analyzed around the coast of Alaska. And if you've been reading about El Nino or the blob, these are two different oceanographic kind of effects right now that all have to do with the warming sea surface temperatures. You can see what is somewhat El Nino, but a lot of the blob across the north and eastern parts of the Gulf of Alaska. This affected winter precipitation across many parts of Alaska, especially south central, last year, and we'll just have to see how long it lasts into this winter. Be nice to get some snow, wouldn't it? Out across north and west, you can see some warmer areas in the Sounds. That's somewhat common there across southwestern Alaska as well. And then here across the Beaufort Sea, you can see some very cold temperatures. That cold is still capable of supporting sea ice, and that's what you have here. Here's a look at the sea ice edge today. There's still a lot of areas of open water. Some of this still has some very small pieces of ice in it, but the main ice pack is just offshore there of Point Barrow and offshore of Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay, though it's a little bit closer than it was just a few days ago, thanks to that little push that's dropping that a little bit further southward. Now remember, we had low pressure out across the Chukchi Sea that is moving eastward, and as it does so, that southwesterly flow should push more of this a little bit further away from the coast in the coming days. You can get that information, a look at the concentrations and thicknesses of that sea ice every single day you want, going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php, and you'll see kind of a patchwork quilt kind of picture there when you click on the link at the top there. So it's an interactive map. You can zoom in right here like we have this image, and it'll be very useful whether you're a search and rescue or just someone interested in the movement of the ice anywhere in Alaska. Now, as we look at the forecast for southeastern Alaska, notice that trough of low pressure has moved just eastward enough so to draw in that west and northwesterly flow across the outer coast, and light northerly winds across the central interior there. Light southwesterly flows expected for the southern Lynn Canal with a 15-knot wind with 3-foot seas. That becomes more of a southerly flow as we get into Friday, but for just about all areas, one exception, the Clarence Strait, the wind should remain fairly light, about 10 to 15 knots, 20 knots there in the Clarence Strait with a 4-foot sea. Otherwise, coastal areas looking at 4 to 5-foot seas, and Lynn Canal winds and waves are going to be light as well through Friday. Now for south central, light and variable flow will be the rule. One exception just east of Kodiak Island, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea. Other than that, seas should be pretty flat and wind should be very light through your Thursday. Very little change for Friday. A slight southwesterly shift coming up Cook Inlet, 10 knots there with 2 to 3-foot seas from Calgon Island northward, and variable flow inside of Prince William Sound. Another good weekend to get out on the water, and southwesterly winds just east of Kodiak. Shelikof Strait looking at variable flow, light winds, and 3-foot seas for Friday. For the Alaska Peninsula, light winds there as well. It's almost as if high pressure's got control of everything. A light westerly flow coming into Bristol Bay, light and variable flow north of Cold Bay. Southerlies coming ashore for Sand Point to King Cove with a 10-knot wind and 3-foot seas, more of a westerly shift as you head out toward Castle Cape. As you get into Friday, the winds are going to pick up a little bit more, and we're going to see that even more out to the west in a minute. Southerlies 15 to 20 knots in the Bering Sea coast and 15 to 20 along the Pacific coast with 3 to 5-foot seas there for Friday. For the Aleutians, a much broader southerly flow coming up to 20 to 25 knots. Some small craft advisories in a few places. 3 to 6-foot seas there from Unalaska to Atka, and 4 to 8, even 9-foot seas there as you head out toward Adak. Again on a southerly flow, and otherwise light and variable winds out to the west. That becomes southwesterly from Kiska to Attu with 20 knots on a 7-foot sea. And southwesterlies are still going from Nikolsky to Atka, 25 knots with 7 to 9-foot seas in most areas. A little bit more of a light and variable flow developing north of Adak and Atka on Friday. For the west coast, southerlies continue there for St. Paul and St. George, 15 knots, more from a southeasterly direction that kind of rounds that high pressure curve up towards St. Lawrence Island at 25 knots with a 6-foot sea. And we're going to have some variability here around Nunivak Island, a southeasterly flow feeding into that pattern at 20 knots with a 3-foot sea, northerlies in Kuskokwim Bay. That becomes south and easterly on Friday, diminishing to 15 knots north of Nunivak Island, and you see that wind shift taking place there, an easterly flow around St. Lawrence Island to St. Matthew, and we still have our southerly winds going through St. Paul and St. George at 20 knots with a 7-foot sea on Friday. Now up north, southeasterlies still on the Beaufort Sea. Again, that's what's been moving that ice slowly closer to the coast at 10 to 15 knots. 1-foot seas in those open areas north of Kaktovik. But here comes that southwesterly wind, 15 to 20 knots, 25 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. And then by Friday, look at that shift. Everything changes over to a westerly flow from Point Lay to Barrow, all the way to Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, and Kaktovik. About 10 to 15 knots, but that is enough to push and start moving that pack a little bit closer, or further away from the shore, I should say. So we'll just have to see what happens with that ice closer to the coast there, north of Prudhoe Bay out toward Kaktovik, hopefully improving conditions enough for some more traffic to get through. Southwesterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound there at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea. That'll be about the strongest it gets there for Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, periods of showers there across parts of southeast, otherwise a nice dry, clear, and calm night for south central. Areas of smoke for the central interior, and south and westerly winds developing around the Chukchi Sea coast. Otherwise areas of fog and low clouds for the Bering Sea coast. Chance for a few showers or storms there across parts of interior southwest tomorrow. Otherwise showers for the central and northern interior, dry in south central, and a few showers for parts of southeast tomorrow. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather. We'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.